Good morning and welcome to City Legal. We are so pleased to have you with us today. We have people today online from Sydney, Canberra and Melbourne. I suppose they're the cities that really count, aren't they? And my name is George Mallos. The City Legal community exists to consider the bigger questions of life by looking at the Bible together. If this is your first time with us, can I extend to you a particularly warm welcome? Our format is a 20-minute talk followed by a Q&A. Now, during the talk, questions can be submitted at any time via Slido, which is in the chat function. Or if you have longer questions, because Slido seems to have a limit to how big the question can be, you can do the question via the chat function. You can also give us your feedback, which is always greatly appreciated, via the QR code, which is also in the chat function. Last month, Danny Mullins gave us his first talk in his mini-series on the implications of following Jesus. And today he'll be talking about the implications of being a servant. What does Jesus say about being a servant, and a servant to whom? I'm looking forward to hearing what Danny has to say. To get us started, John Breen is going to read our passage for us. He'll be reading from John's Gospel, chapter 13, verses 1 to 20. Welcome, John.
Hi, George. Hi, everyone. Good to see you.
Good to see you, John. Tell us, John, who are you?
Yeah, so I used to work as a corporate advisory lawyer at a firm in the city, and I actually made the shift a couple of years ago to work at my church as an apprentice and also do some work for City Legal. So I've been doing a lot of kind of the background kind of stuff at the moment over Zoom, doing some of the tech stuff, and I'm excited to read the Bible for us this morning.
So you went from being a corporate lawyer to being an apprentice.
That's right. A bit of a drop down, I guess.
Is that how we climb the ladder?
Yes. You know, the first to be, the last has to be, start from the bottom. And make your way up.
The first will be last and the last will be first.
That's what I was trying to think of, yeah.
Good on you, John. Okay, if you'd like to read the passage for us, please, and we'll get underway.
Great. So as George said, today's passage is John 13, starting at verse 1. And I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version. And
I think it's in the chat section as well, isn't it?
It should be in the chat section as well.
Yeah.
Let's go. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he'd come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments and, taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "The one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you." For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, "Not all of you are clean." When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor was a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I'm not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen. But the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I am telling you this now before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me.
Well, friends, it's wonderful to be with you again. I suspect that some of you are wearing pajamas, and as you can see, I'm not. I thought I'd better dress up for the occasion. Well, a friend of mine, Jim, is an accountant in his 70s who's finding it hard to resign. Why? Well, it's because of his relationships with his clients. He actually cares for his clients, and they trust him. And the people who bought out his firm, they're not going to be interested in his clients because they won't bring in enough money. They're after the bottom line, the new owners. And so my friend Jim is finding it hard to retire. It's not an ideal situation, but there's something really quite special about it. Special because he cares for them and they trust him. It's about relationship. Another friend of mine, Janine, is a solicitor in the western suburbs. She takes on clients from difficult backgrounds. She doesn't always get paid. She fights for their interests. She's feisty. Usually when they come to court hearings, they can't afford a barrister. So she will actually represent them and do the job of a barrister and the solicitor at the same time, while on the other side of the court, they've got solicitors and barrister. Sometimes she has clients who have their life all over the place, drinking, petty crime and such like. Not only does she represent them, but she'll not hesitate to talk to them straight, that they need to pull up their socks and get their life sorted out before something really bad happens to them. Janine's feisty, but she cares for her clients. Well, I start talking about Jim and Janine because I want to put on the agenda today, who do you want to be? Not what, but who. I don't know if Jim and Janine impress you or not. They certainly impress me. Hearing their stories, I say to myself, I want to be like those guys, but in my own area. I'm not an accountant, I'm not a solicitor, but I want to be like that. And so if you're in any way attracted to their story, there's another question that we need to answer. What is their secret? What's their secret? How do you get to be like that? Well, the passage that was just read out for us by John has the answer. First of all, we're going to be thinking about being completely clean. Completely clean. About a month ago, I joined you at City Legal, and when we had a first look at the story of the foot washing, and really this first point is a recap of what I said last time, what we looked at last time. In verse 1, we learn that in this event of the foot washing, Jesus loved his disciples to the end. And in verse 3, we have a description of what was on Jesus' mind when he washed their feet. He was conscious that he had come from the Father, that is from God, and was returning to the Father. That's why I've drawn this as a parabola. Now, this diagram represents these points. Jesus had come from the Father, was returning to the Father, but whilst he was here on earth, his greatest act of love was to die for humanity, to save humanity. Now, quite intentionally, John associates Jesus coming from the Father and returning to the Father with this story of the foot washing. Coming from and going to is Jesus laying aside his outer garments and taking the form of a slave in verse 4. And then his return to table once he'd again put on his outer garments in verse 12. And Jesus interprets his act of washing their feet as an act of cleansing, which only the cross could perform. Can you see the foot washing is superimposed onto Jesus' overall mission? So the real meaning of the foot washing is that it's an enacted parable that explains the significance of Jesus' whole mission, of Jesus coming from God's very side, becoming a human being, dying on the cross as a servant, as a slave, to serve us in the most humiliating of ways, and then to regain his place at the Father's side with all authority. And so it's very important for us. Now, if you're checking out Christianity and you want to be clean before God, you want to have a clean and clear conscience before God, the only way you can do it is to be washed by Jesus. That's the only way. We cannot wash ourselves clean. What is more, when you get washed by Jesus' death, your guilt is washed away definitively, once and for all. It's just awesome. And so I'd like to say to you, if you're checking out Christianity, please do this. Please get washed, because one day you will have to face God and you want to face him clean. This is how you can do it. I know you've got things on your conscience. But if you're a Christian, this is who you are. Remember, I began asking, who do you want to be, or who are you? Well, if you're a Christian, you are clean. You are clean. And really, everything else flows out from this. So that's first and foremost the most important application of this passage. We looked at it last time, but there are further implications for those who have been washed clean of their guilt by Jesus. And to help us explore these implications, I'm going to do a quick poll. So, John, if you could, it might be, yep, great. So could you click on that poll link? That would be wonderful. And please complete that poll as quickly as you can. I'll give you another 5 or 6 seconds to click on the link, and then I'm going to show, hopefully, the results. I'll just read out the questions as you're clicking. So I'd like to ask you what you understand the meaning of the foot washing is for those who have been washed by Jesus. The first option is that they should serve one another as Christ did. The second is they're sent into the world on a mission to save others. The third option is both option 1 and 2, and I'd encourage you not to use this option just to hedge your bets. Only choose it if you're certain. And fourth option is I really don't know, and that's okay. We're here to work it out. If you've got no idea, that's fine. And I was going to say, I should have said it first, if you're here for the first time, you actually don't need to vote. Just sit back and watch the results flow in. So let's flick over and see what you think. To share my screen. Okay, let's have a look at those results that are coming in. So some of you think that it's about serving one another as Christ did. Some of you think that the meaning of this parable, of this story, is that those who've been washed by Jesus are sent into the world on a mission to save others. And it looks like the majority think that it's both options 1 and 2. Well, that was just a way of getting us thinking about the passage and engaged. I'll stop our share because it always helps to have some kind of engagement, doesn't it? But those of you who said option 1, you're dead right. We are actually called to be a slave. If we've been cleansed by Jesus, we are called to be slaves. This is the clear teaching of the passage. Let me read verses 12 to 15. Do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do just as I have done to you. Now let's be clear. Sorry, I was covering the text a bit. Let's be clear, Jesus isn't asking his followers to literally wash each other's feet, but rather to serve each other as a slave would serve their master, just as Jesus had done for them. Now, this is really interesting because in a few short weeks, these guys would become the leaders of the Christian movement. And Jesus doesn't want them to lead the usual way of using and abusing power. Jesus is a great teacher. There's no hypocrisy in him. He doesn't ask his followers to do something that he hasn't done himself. This isn't a mere gimmick As shocking as it was for Jesus to take the form of his slave and wash his disciples' feet, which is, Peter said, "No, Lord, never." Jesus, what we see is this is actually who Jesus is. The washing of the feet points to that greater service of Jesus leaving heaven itself to become a servant and a slave and to die on the cross for us. This is who Jesus is. And so he asks his disciples, will you be like me? I want you to be like me. You need to wash each other's feet. You need to be slaves of each other. That's what he wants from those he's cleansed. So the primary application is about how Christians should look out for Christians in financial support of a mate who's been unemployed for a long time, in moral support of a mate whose marriage is on the rocks, to pray with him every week. There's all kinds of ways that Christians can serve and look out for each other. But I think by extension, this kind of attitude should also overflow into other relationships, like in the workplace. The internal and external pressure of our work environment is to be self-seeking either for us personally or for the business, rather than to genuinely serve the interests of our clients. Now, I know a good deal of health professionals because I work with allied health students. So I've got a couple of stories here, and you can make some adjustments for the area that you work in the law. So allied health professionals are often asked by bosses to prolong treatment, even when symptoms no longer require it. It's such a self-interested action and really doesn't act in the interests of the client or patient. In fact, it's against their interest because they're getting overcharged. Now, I know that you can make relevant adjustments for practices that take place within the firms that you work within. But let me be clear, such practices do not follow Jesus' example. They don't. I was chatting with a new graduate physiotherapist who's a Christian, and his boss asked him to fabricate case notes of a meeting with a client. That never happened, so as to get more NDIS funding. He told his boss that he couldn't do that in good conscience, and good on him. Not only would that be totally dishonest, but it's acting in self-interest of the business at the expense of the taxpayer. That is at the expense of all of us. Once again, I think you can make the relevant adjustments into your workplace. And do you see that such practices do not follow Jesus' example? Rather, Jim and Janine that I started with, they're much better examples. Jim, who's struggling to retire because he genuinely cares for his clients and his clients trust him. It's not a good reason to find it hard to retire. I mean, he's not interested in the money. That's not what it's about. It's the people. The way that he has practiced as an accountant has been deeply shaped by Jesus, by being a servant, by being a slave of others. He's learned to serve others because Jesus first served him. And Janine, she's talented, capable, feisty, and she's a Christian. You know what? For both Jim and Janine, who has been a far more important question than what. They've understood that Jesus has cleaned them, spotless. And so they want to follow his example. They're so grateful for what he's done for them. So I want to ask you, what about you? Who do you want to be? And who are you? If you have been washed by Jesus, can you see that he's called you in your marriage, in your workplace, with your family, with your friends, with your boss, with your secretarial staff, with your clients? He's called you to serve the interests of others as a first century slave would serve their master, no better, as Jesus has served humanity. Well, the third big implication of this passage for us is that those who've been washed by Jesus are called to be messengers or missionaries. Option 3, both option 1 and 2 in our survey, is actually the right answer. Let me show you why. Like escape room clues we saw a month ago, it can be a bit subtle, but I've got no doubt about this, that if you're a Christian, if you have been cleansed, you have been called to be a messenger. The clues are there in verse 16 and verse 20. So in verse 16, truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. if you know these things. Blessed are you if you do them. So this service isn't just the service of the Christian community. It is also service beyond the Christian community. And verse 20, truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me. And whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. You see, in the foot washing, we actually have Jesus sending his disciples out. And we really get this, I just realized I've been showing the wrong slide. Sorry about this. We get this corroborated in chapter 17, a couple of chapters later, where Jesus says, as you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. In fact, if you look in John's gospel, particularly John 13 to 17, you don't see Jesus send his disciples anytime, except here in John 13. It's the key moment where he sends his disciples into the world. And so, my final diagram isn't there. Can you see what Jesus being sent in the world is paralleled by the people he's cleansed being sent into the world? He sent us on a parallel mission to Jesus' own mission. Jesus was sent into the world to save the world by dying as our substitute, to bear our guilt for us. And we are sent into the world to bear witness to Jesus, so that through Jesus, the world might be saved. We're sent to be messengers. To put this another way, a lot of Christians know what they've been saved from, but have no idea what they've been saved for. We've been saved for many things, but one of the most important things is to be a slave and to be missionaries, messengers to our world, so that the world may be saved, so that our friends may be saved. If you've been cleansed by Jesus, you're not only a slave of others, you are on a mission from God. I want to finish with a story told by American pastor Tim Keller about a young woman who came to his church to check out Christianity that kind of captures much of what this passage is talking about. Now, she worked for a company in Manhattan, says Keller, and not long after starting there, she made a big mistake that she thought would cost her her job. But her boss went into his superior and took complete responsibility for what she'd done. As a result, he lost some of his reputation and ability to maneuver within the organization. She was amazed at what he'd done and went in to thank him. She told him that she'd often seen supervisors take credit for what she had accomplished, but she had never seen a supervisor take the blame for something she had done. And she wanted to know what made this man different. Now, he was very modest and deflected her questions, but she was insistent. And finally, he told her, I am a Christian. That means, among other things, that God accepts me because Jesus Christ took the blame for the things that I have done wrong. He did that on the cross. That's why I have the desire and sometimes the ability to take the blame for others. She stared at him for a long moment and said, where do you go to church? He suggested she go to my church, and so she did. His character had been shaped by his experience of grace in the gospel, and it made his behavior as a manager attractive and strikingly different from that of others. This lack of self-interest and ruthlessness on the part of her supervisor was eventually life-transforming for her because she became a Christian herself. So are you checking out Christianity? Do you find Jesus' example attractive? Do you find maybe your Christian friend who invited you here attractive? Well, know that you can be clean and you actually can be transformed to be like Jesus. If you are a Christian, I want to remind you of who you are. You are clean, you are a slave, and you are a messenger. Let's try and do these things. Let's try and be these things. Thanks very much, friends.
Okay, we've got some questions that have come in. Danny, if foot washing tells us who we should be, what more does it tell us about who Jesus is? Well,
there's a few interesting things going on in this story. It tells us something very important, that Jesus is a servant That's the very character of what he's like, that he came from the very side of God to serve us. But what's really interesting is Jesus, his first application after saying that it's about getting clean before God, is to say that it's about Christians loving one another. And this also tells us something really important about Jesus. Because as you read on in John's Gospel, or as you read throughout John's Gospel, you find out that Jesus has a very, very special relationship with his Father. That at the very heart of reality, there is a relationship of love. I'll just take you to one place in John chapter 15, verse 9. It's one of my favourite parts of John's Gospel. Find it, John 15, verse 9. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. See, at the heart of reality, there is a Father who loves a Son. At the heart of reality, there is love. So why would Jesus lay down? It's because at the very heart of who Jesus is, or at the very heart of reality, there is, if God was the Muslim God, just a single person God, you wouldn't have a God of love. You may have a God of self-interest, a self-absorbed God, but the Christian God is relational at the very core of his being, because from all eternity, there's a Father and a Son and Holy Spirit who are a community of love. And so when Jesus applies this to us, after talking about cleaning us, he says, love one another, serve one another. He wants Christians to be a community of love, because that is who God is, a community of love. So I hope that just takes things just to another level. Yeah. Another question?
Thanks, Danny. What makes you sure Jesus wasn't literally telling his disciples to continue washing others' feet when he said you ought also to wash one another's feet?
Okay. Literally. Okay. So I think if I understand the question, I think that the person wonders whether we shouldn't actually literally wash each other's feet. Look, there are a couple of reasons. I actually used to live in France, and there was a church in France that believed that it actually should be taken literally. And when they had communion, they also did foot washing. And so there are some Christians, I don't think there are many Christians who take it literally, but I think you can tell that it's not something to be taken literally because, well, literally in the literary sense of the word, yes, because can you see there's a connection between Jesus coming from heaven and returning to his Father's side and dying on the cross. That is what the heart of this is about. And Jesus is saying, be like me. And yes, he uses the words, wash each other's feet, but he's really saying, be like me in every respect. And so he has been eternally loving his Father, the Father loving the Son, and he's laid down his life for us. And so he says, be like me, love one another. And he says, be like me, don't keep it to yourself. Let other people know that they also can be clean, that they can be received by the Father. Isn't that wonderful? Those who receive you, the ones I've sent, receive me. And whoever receives me is received by the Father who sent me. I think I just botched that a little bit. Yeah. Whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. And if you receive God the Father, you are received by God the Father.
Thanks, Danny. You said that Christians should love Christians. Isn't that a bit insular?
Well, I think that's just the point of the second application. And maybe that's something that should be a bit clearer. So, sorry, the third application. So clean, slaves, loving one another, and slaves to the world. That's actually what we're supposed to be. We're actually on a mission from God, like the Blues Brothers. But our mission isn't to make good music. It's actually to help people enter eternity. And that will actually cost us something, because people will think we're silly. People will sometimes persecute Christians for going on this mission. But that, yeah, it's definitely not just it's not just insular, it's for everyone.
All right, well, the next question follows on from that. It says, so should we all be missionaries?
Yes, I think that if you are a Christian, you are a missionary. So, and I think there's a lot of confusion about this. I don't think Christians understand this, but in quite a few different places, that is what a Christian is. When Jesus called his disciples, the very first disciples he called, he says, I will make you fishers of men. He will make them into disciples, into missionaries. And then when Jesus expands this, he makes it clear that's not just for those 12. A bit later in Mark's gospel, when he says, if you, better just look it up so I can get the wording right. Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Again, it's about following his example. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. So we actually do whatever Jesus wants, but we're actually on about the gospel. We're gospel people. We're missionary people. That's what a Christian is. We're sent into the world. Yeah.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah. The next one's more a comment, I suppose, looking for your view on it rather than a question. It says, answer 2 was to go into the world to save others. Only Jesus saves. We go into the world to tell others that Jesus saves, but we cannot save them ourselves. Can you comment on that, Danny?
Yeah. Look, I think that's fair. And it's actually a big relief. God does the saving. Jesus does the saving. All we have to do is do the telling. And so people's response is actually on them, just as we give them the information they need to know, and it's up to them to respond. And again, I'd love to say, if you're checking out Christianity, you know a little bit more about the message now than you did before this meeting. But I'd like to invite you, would you check it out? Read one of the Gospels. Read John's Gospel, read Mark's Gospel. Ask the friend who invited you, could we do that together? Yeah, so we don't have the responsibility to save. We're messengers. I think that's the key word. He says that we're messengers in verse 16.
Thanks. Okay, compelling New York example. Should Christian law firm partners take responsibility with clients and regulatory authorities for mistakes of their employees?
That sounds like a complicated question, and obviously wisdom is needed. So I just don't inhabit your world to think of the possible complexities. Obviously, on this occasion, this man judged that it was the thing to do, and he had an awareness of his the wider situation. And I can see that sometimes this would not be the thing to do. You know, if she was someone who was consistently underperforming or was vindictive, or she might need to have love shown to her in some other way. But in this case, he judged that this was the right thing to do, and he took the rap. So I think that sometimes it will mean that you actually sacrifice your own advantage for the advantage of someone else. I think what's interesting is he was a bit hesitant to speak about Jesus, and I think, which is interesting in itself, isn't it? There's going to be ethics of, if you're a boss, evangelizing a subordinate. It's a very, very delicate thing. I can understand why he was so hesitant, and that he only did it when she pushed him to it. because otherwise you might think, oh, my only way of advancement in this company is if I become a Christian. And wouldn't that be a terrible reason for becoming a Christian? I think there's something very credible about this man. And so as you seek to bear witness to Jesus, if you're a Christian, there are all kinds of potholes and minefields, and may God give you the greatest wisdom to do it as best as he possibly can. But it actually flows out of who you are. Can you see it? What Jesus has done flows out of who he is. When I talked about my friends Janine and Jim, I changed their names actually, but that it flows out of who they are. And so just be who you are. And part of that is being a slave, a servant, and part of that is being a messenger. And the fundamental thing is being clean. Yeah, George?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the story myself, but obviously our next question is, if I knew how to drive Slido, I'd know where it's gone. I've lost the question. It's gone. I'll go into the next one.
It's gone to the top. It's gone to the top.
Oh, is it?
I can see it. So what makes you sure Jesus, oh no, is it, I work as a legal service regulator?
Yeah. The New York partners are right. The partner must supervise and manage the employees and the firm is liable. It sounds right to me.
Yeah, great. That's a really helpful. Thanks so much for putting that in for a guy like me who doesn't work in a corporate environment.
Okay. Is the command to love one another a way of pointing to the importance of the local church as a demonstration of the love of Christ to the world? I mean, we know as Christians, we're often on show, aren't we? What does it say about how the world should see us then?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. And that also helps me just make a connection. I think this foot washing parable, it's an enacted parable, is actually key to understanding all of John 13 to 17. And later in John 13 to 17, Jesus speaks of a new commandment. I'm in wrong gospel here. He says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples. Yes, yeah, the question is dead right. That the command to love one another in the local church and among Christians is not just in the local church, it's also in the workplace, in the family, among friends. It does show the non-Christian world what God is like. It does show that we're his disciples. I don't know if we always do it very well. I thought the words of that supervisor were very telling and honest when he said that because Jesus took the blame for the things I've done wrong, he said, that is why I have the desire and sometimes the ability to take the blame for others. We falter with this. We don't do it perfectly, and that's why we keep on coming back to knowing that we're clean. And knowing that we're clean definitively means you can get up and give it another crack. When you fail, you can give it another crack. Nothing better than knowing Jesus. Knowing him can deeply transform our lives.
Thank you for sharing that, Danny. And thank you for your talk today. It's been wonderfully encouraging for all of us. And I'm sure if we were all together, we'd be clapping and showing our appreciation in that way. Thanks, Danny.
Thanks, George.
Our next meeting is on the 9th of September, and we're going to do something a little bit different. David Robinson will be interviewing the well-known Australian journalist, Greg Sheridan. Greg has recently written a book. It's called Christians, The Urgent Case for Jesus. So it's going to be in an interview style, but there'll be an opportunity to lodge questions as the interview's going on, and I'm sure David will be able to fit those in. So that's on the 9th of September. Next Thursday, our Hope Groups meeting, our small groups meeting. If you're not in a Hope Group or you'd like to find out about Hope Groups, please let us know via the feedback on the Q&A, and we can get in touch with you and let you know what's happening in that area. So until the 9th of September, we say we look forward to seeing you then, and may God be with you.